we can clearly see from the DORA process that broadcast messages are being utilized. What does this mean for us? Well, it means that if the DHCP server is not in the same broadcast domain as the client, well, those broadcast messages go unanswered because there's no server that can respond to these broadcast messages within the same broadcast domain. So examine this topology. The DHCP server is in a completely different broadcast domain than the DHCP client. Let me draw out these broadcast domains for you. Two different broadcast domains. The DHCP server is in the 192.168.1.0 network, and the DHCP client's in the 10.0.55.0/24 network. Our multi-layer switch is a router. It's routing traffic between the different subnets. And what does it do with broadcast messages that it receives? It gobbles them up. So the DHCP discover message, which is broadcasted, does not go through that multi-layer switch. Let's see that in our live environment. PC1 needs to obtain an IP address from the DHCP server in VLAN 100, completely different subnets. So let's examine what's going to happen when DSW1, which is the default gateway, is absorbing those broadcast messages and not forwarding them, because that is the normal default behavior. So let's go over to PC1 right now, which is in VLAN 10. We'll type in ipconfig. We can see that it has the IP address of 10.1.10, subnet mask of /26. Right now, its default gateway is 10.1.1.1. If we examine the properties, we can see that the address has been statically assigned. So I'm going to change this to DHCP, but before we do so, let's capture some packets with Wireshark. So we're going to set up the interface that we want to capture packets on. So the interface that's connected up to VLAN 10. So the capture's been started. We only want to look at DHCP messages because I don't want to clutter the screen. So nothing's happening right now. Let's go back and change our option. Obtain an IP address automatically. Let's use DHCP. And here we go. There's a discover message. There's a discover message. Notice they're going unanswered. And they're going unanswered because the multi-layer switch, the router, the default gateway is absorbing those DHCP discover messages. So how do we utilize DHCP when the DHCP server is in a completely different subnet? Well, the default gateway has to be set up with the IP helper address command. On the interface, let me repeat that, on the interface, right there, on the interface that is going to be receiving those DHCP discover messages. And this IP helper address says, take those DHCP discover messages that have been received and send them to the DHCP server at this IP address. But send them as unicast messages, not broadcasted, unicast, because that DHCP server might be 5 router hops away in a completely remote location in the environment. Maybe the server farm. Maybe a different building. Maybe a different site. So we'll have to pass through multiple subnets in order to get there. So that's the IP address that the DHCP server is at. Now, it gets sent. We have the information coming back. So the offer, and then that gets exchanged or sent back down to the client. So let's examine that in real time. Back in our environment right now, PC1 is sending those discover messages, but they're going unanswered. So here's what we're going to do. We are going to enable debugging on DSW1, and then we are going to enable that IP helper address on interface VLAN 10, because interface VLAN 10 is the SVI that's receiving the discover messages right now. So let's debug IP DHCP server packet on DSW1. Get that started. And then we'll go to interface VLAN 10 and type an IP helper address, and the server's at 10.1.100.100. And when we hit enter here, we should see some action. So I'm going to hit enter. Let's go back to Wireshark. And let's force this process a little quicker. Let's go back to PC1 and we'll type in on PC1 IP config switch renew. Go back to Wireshark. There we go. There's our discover, there's our offer, there's our request, there's our acknowledge. Exactly what we were looking for. If we go back to DSW1, let's go ahead and type in you all to stop our debugging. We'll scroll back up here and let's just see if we can find some information. There we go. Finding a relay agent for the client with this particular MAC address. Notice what it's ending in 06D6. That is PC1's MAC address. And it arrived in on interface VLAN 10. Notice it says that this particular request is going to be forwarded on to 10.1.100.100, which is the DHCP server in VLAN 100. And then we received a reply from that particular DHCP server, and we're sending that reply out to the client at 06D6. So the multi-layer switch in this case is the middleman, if you want to say it, because it's going to be responsible for taking those messages that arrive, those DHCP discover messages, and then successfully forwarding them on to the DHCP server that's in a completely different subnet.